Dr. White, a pleasure to see you.
Dr. Wheeler. Out in the backyard still. I gotta make it out there to North Carolina one day and just hang out there with you.
Well, technically, not North Carolina, but Virginia, but
Virginia.
weather more or less. Yes, yes.
Virginia.
But it's a long drive. If you showed up in North Carolina, you'd be sad because it's hours away.
Yeah. So luckily, I served in both places, so I know both places. Yeah, I served.
Virginia's better.
I served in Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Then I served at in the transportation division there in Virginia. I think I want to say it's Fort Lee. I want to say it's Fort Lee there.
Yeah, I'm not far from Fort Belvoir, so.
Oh, you're not far from. Well, Belvoir was supposed to be one of my stomping grounds when I switched over to Intel and cyber. They do a lot of training and education there in Fort Belvoir.
Yeah.
One of my stomping grounds, but I never got there.
In any case, yeah. In any case, if you come over to Virginia, come out to my deck. Hopefully, the weather will be kind to you.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. Somewhere I should click and open the notes.
We have a couple of good things to talk about today.
Excellent. I always like to talk about good things.
Out there.
Okay. Jasmine, yep. Yeah, maybe I should, while we're waiting, I'll do the boring task, which is, we're trying to switch over towards tables because they convert to other formats like Markdown much better.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You've probably been seeing that elsewhere because the whole unshade shade stuff.
Yep.
I mean, it can be done, but it doesn't mean you want to.
Yeah, this is a lot neater. The thing, especially when you put the X's on the thing, that's always nice.
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to do the basics here, so I'm going to list you first, Jay. You are the man of honor here, or whatever. So is Adrian here? I don't see Adrian.
Adrian will be joining shortly. I know I was speaking to him earlier. We were trying to get the agenda together. So I'm pretty sure he'll be here. Jasmine's here, so I know he'll be here.
Okay.
Melba's here though, so I think that's like the most important right now.
Oh my goodness.
I am honored.
Okay. Melba, I'm not sure what you wanted. I'm just going to put in Melba Lopez because that's what it says here, but please adjust to taste. I am just trying to get it.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm sure we can make things better, but I was trying to do the minimum viable, if that makes any sense. While we wait for everybody to come in, I'm just noticing and going, huh? And look at that. And now I don't have to say include org anymore because it's right there. So Melba, if there's an organization you wish to identify.
IBM, right?
There, yep, there. I just added it.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm gonna, yeah, and we keep track of this stuff. I mean, we'll listen to anybody, but we try to make sure there's multiple organizations involved. So, in particular, get worried when there's just nobody seems to be. It's only one org ever. That's so.
Well, hopefully the usual people usually join. Victor usually joins, and then we had Joad last meeting. We had Joad, he was here. I fear due to all the, there's like 2 or 3 additional meetings on the calendar that everybody joins. I fear that those meetings may interfere, or people may say, well, we have only so much time we can devote to the OpenSSF.
Yeah, I understand. We definitely want to try to make, we don't want to overwhelm people. I think there are ways that we can work that. And to be fair, this meeting date's kind of unfortunate because it's right following Juneteenth, which I and many other people had off. So we may have fewer today just because of that. Adrian, welcome.
Yeah, I wonder what, I wonder, I mean, you got that one holiday, and then it's piggybacking. You got the 2 weeks, and then you got another holiday weekend. So a week and a half, we'll be on another holiday weekend. 4th of July weekend. Another week and a half. I mean, the people, this would be an opportune time for people to take vacation too, if they want to take vacation. It'd be an opportune time to do it now.
I mean, it's always a little more challenging over the summer. So, and Christmas time too.
No, Christmas time is not challenging. That's a necessity. Right around
It's a necessity to have meetings. Is that what you're saying?
15th of December. See you all next year.
There we go.
All right, cool. So I guess we'll for the purposes of the recording and the meeting in general, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll put in the Slack that, hey, we're meeting now, so if you feel so inclined, join the meeting. But there are a couple of things we want to talk today. I know Adrian's been hard at work getting clear on some issues. And there's a couple of other things he put down here as well. Also, we found out today that in a book that was just written by Chris Hughes and Tony, I can't remember his last name, but it was the forward was written by Alan Friedman. Software transparency, they gave us a good 7 pages about S2C2F in that book. Hey, Tom. So that's some amazing stuff that we can talk about today as well. I mean, I'd love that, and I bought the book as well. It's due to get here tomorrow because I like to put books like that on the bookshelf.
I just put the link in the chat.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna copy that right into the notes now. Oh wait, that's. Okay, yes. The whole link.
Oh, did I mess it up?
No, you didn't mess it up. I messed it up. So
okay.
I copied part of a link, and that turns out not to work so well. So, but through the power of selection and copy paste, I got it right. That's great. That sounds. Has anybody read this book? Is this something that we should be? Wow, 336 pages. Is that something that we should put on our beat script list?
I'm putting it on my list. I don't know if I'll get through all 300 pages. I definitely will look at some of the chapters that interest me.
Okay.
It's about the supply chain security. So I imagine most of the chapters will interest me, but I'll dive in on the ones that don't involve writing code. So there you go.
Yeah. So, and inside Microsoft, we have a special service where we can access digital books for free if we're an employee. So I started taking a look at it. The S2C2F was mentioned in the chapter 7, and chapter 7 is called Existing and Emerging Commercial Guidance. And so they I guess analyzed a couple of different frameworks and guides. So they have Salsa in there, Google Graph for understanding artifact composition. They have the Center for Internet Security, Software Supply Chain Guide. They have the CNCF in there. They added the S2C2F. They have OWASP, OpenSSF scorecard, and that's pretty much the whole chapter. So just kind of giving you insight into what they talked about in that chapter. So yeah, it might be a cool thing to recommend to others. I personally haven't read it yet. I just found out about it this morning.
Fabulous.
Let's see here. So, Jay, anything else, or should we jump to the next thing on our list?
Let's jump right into the next thing on the list. I do want to make sure we leave some time open to finish Melba's review. I know we stopped. We only got like a page or something in, or something like that. Or page or two in. I don't know how far we got, but there was some more nuggets there that we could chew on, that we need to chew on. So I wanted to make sure we had some time for that. Yeah, let's jump right on in.
Sure. Okay. I'll share my screen. And share. There we go. Let me know when you can see it. Okay. So I don't think we're going to spend too long discussing these other agenda items, but jumping into issue number 14. Let me go back to issue number 14. Okay. So crosswalk with salsa. So when we first published the S2C2F, it was before salsa achieved 1.0. And we identified two requirements that we thought were mapped to salsa requirements. So, verify the provenance of your OSS. Salsa had this provenance for dependencies requirement. And under our rebuild it section, our rebuild it section is specifically about rebuilding OSS that you consume. And salsa had a, make your build reproducible. That was like their aspirational level 4 guidance. Right. And of course, they're talking about the code that you're producing. I don't think that they were specifically talking about the OSS that you consume, but nonetheless, I mapped the two. And now when we look at salsa, this is the 1.0. We've got, choose an appropriate build platform, follow consistent build process, distribute your provenance. Then they have like generate provenance and with 3 different levels of maturity there, and your isolation strength. So I don't think the things that we mapped to previously are even here anymore.
I know the reproducible builds went off, and I can talk about that. There's been some early talks about creating a new track for that, although that's by no means a certain thing. The other one, can we go back here? What was the mapping and from map 2? Because it sounds like you're saying that, hey, there's no overlap, which is, to me, a little surprising at this point.
Well, the S2C2F is hyper focused on requirements for securely consuming OSS.
Right.
And salsa was largely a requirements on how to securely build software. So like right. Producer focus versus consumer focus.
Right. That's been the mantra all along. I'm just shocked that there's that. Just in the natural process of things, we've managed to eliminate overlaps, which is not what I was expecting. Cool. I'm the one who said, "Hey, we need to do it," But I was expecting a little overlap, but I hadn't thought through, as opposed to sitting down and doing the crosswalk, because I can remember that. I remember there's a little overlap, which your earlier analysis is that's correct.
Yeah.
Now mean, there is information about providing the provenance. I mean, maybe on the S2C2F side, the answer is review that provenance or consume and use that provenance information when available, or something along that line.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Because in fact, I think that's the trick. Is when we've got. Mel, I just realized your hand is raised. I'm sorry. Let me
finish your comment.
Okay.
Finish your comment.
Yeah, because I think it would make more sense for, and by the way, appreciate the crosswalk, where salsa produces something that is useful for consumption, that we point out, in order to do this, here's some data you could use to bring in to do that, if that actually makes sense. That's a big if, of course. Yeah, and I can give some background on the whole reproducible builds stuff if you want to go down that rat hole. But but I'm amazed because I hadn't done this particular crosswalk. I just said, "Hey, should be done," and I'm surprised that it's that cut and dry.
Yeah, and so I think like if open source maintainers are following Salsa and they are producing provenance of their open source components, then this makes a lot of sense. Then we are consuming and verifying the provenance of the OSS that's provided by people that follow Salsa.
Right. Right. Or actually, even if they don't follow Salsa, just if they provide that information, yeah, it's just, I'm looking to make those connections. And because if we can make the argument these connect, and I think we can, then that actually encourages both.
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
And I'm sorry, Melba, I didn't realize earlier. Please go.
It's okay. Yeah. So in the last meeting, we briefly touched on some of this, where there is a small overlap with the current specification, but there's also a gap between the two, and that there's an opportunity to enhance that. And it is in the PDF, and we can go over it again. But there's very small overlap. And then Jay did made a good point about the creator of a piece of software. Let's say it has no dependencies, right? It's brand new and it's dependent on nothing, right? That's where Salsa comes in. And then S2C2F is where, okay, you're going to consume that package and other packages, and you need a framework to make sure that you are doing the right thing before you consume those packages, right? But that there's kind of almost like an origin, right? Like you have to like start from scratch, or assume you start from scratch, because Salsa right now there's dependencies, right? So it just keeps going. It's like never ending, right? If you keep going down the transitive dependencies. So at some point you just have to say, okay, if you just think of the true origin, where this one little tiny package comes from that has no dependencies, that's where Salsa comes in. And after that, S2C2F comes in, right? But I can show you more of a visual later.
You know, back this time last year, when we were talking about Salsa, and this was right before, you know, this is when David and Crove and Adrian and I, we were talking about trying to bring S2C2F into the OpenSSF. At that time, the conversations around Salsa, if you remember, some of the stuff was, well, we can attest to it because, you know, we the individual is saying it's good, right? And that was respective of some of the instances where, like you said, you know, you're building it from scratch. We said we did this. We're signing it using our email address, right? That's when, you know, SIG store was just coming out. We're signing it and we're saying it's good. And I'm saying, I'm not taking anybody's word for anything. What are you guys talking about? But I think that's where, you know, S2C2F coming in. S2C2F, you're not taking anybody's word for it at that point. And I think that's where the gaps can be filled, where you would have a trust, where trust is an issue. Now you trust the process. There's a process now, right? At the consumer level, right? There's a process at the consumer level where that process doesn't exist necessarily on the producer side, especially when you're dealing with, you know, just a fresh build. There's nothing to depend on. Now you're talking about the processes on the other end, on the consumer side. So you don't have to trust a person, you can trust the process, right? So I mean, that's my train of thought there. Especially respective of trying to crosswalk, because I think we can crosswalk. I think there'll be some similarities, but I think when you bust down into what exactly we're talking about from one framework to the other, they look similar, but in context they're different, right? You can build an argument both ways.
So, Melba, I'm glad you have visuals. I'm very much a visual person. I'd love to see those later. So maybe we can come back to this when you share your visual with us, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, the visual I have for today is that PDF. I don't have a visual of the connections, not as of yet.
Okay. Then, okay, I think we'll just, oops. I think we'll just
I think the crosswalk for what needs to occur should be at the I think that crosswalk should be at the working group level, not at the SIG level. I think at the working group level, we need to figure out a tiger team to do this crosswalk and then present it at the working group level, just because it encompasses two or three different SIGs underneath that working group, right?
Yeah, but I do love this touch point where we have this requirement to verify the provenance of the OSS you're consuming, and Salsa's telling everybody, you better produce your provenance and share it, right? They've got distribute your provenance. And we know that like the NPM registry is also supporting this notion as well, because they started adopting SigStore, and they, you know, for certain builds they can attach the provenance of the build when they publish packages up to NPM. And so it's like when systems start supporting the nature of provenance like that, that makes it a whole lot easier for like a consumption and validation story, which is great. Okay, so moving on to the next, moving on to the next agenda item, creation of an FAQ. Wanted to get everybody's thoughts because what just happened? Oh my goodness. Okay, so coming back to the issues, we had this one submitted by Reggie Chen a while ago, and we answered him. And just so that this knowledge isn't lost, I started thinking like maybe we should create an FAQ, not inside the guidebook, but could we just create a new section in our repo somewhere here where we have like an FAQ, and we could have is anybody else doing that inside the OpenSSF or have any best practices around managing an FAQ?
Funny you should talk about this. Okay, so all right. In the past, up until recently, most of the documents have been just dump markdown into GitHub, and sometimes in a couple of cases Google Docs, particularly if they're expecting, you know, lots of simultaneous edits. Okay, there are pros and cons. Okay, and so the best practices working group basically has a little short, has some guides, And the complaint was, oh my gosh, we're linking directly to the markdown in GitHub. These look terrible. So the problem is that there is literally there's at least a billion ways to start with some source files and generate some pretty looking pages on a website. Okay. The problem isn't that it can't be done. The problem is there's so many ways it can be done that we could spend a lifetime just analyzing the options. Okay. Especially when you've got a whole bunch of people who know how to program. It's the bike shedding problem with multiple bike sheds. So,
Got it.
After some discussion, sorry. Okay, so basically, what I proposed is a process that I have defined as a simplest possible process. Okay, the SPP. GitHub supports taking markdowns and generating them into pretty looking HTML. We can go configure it. Okay. The only problem with it, just the default way, is that each repo basically ends up with its own domain. But wait, we control the DNS for OpenSSF.org. We can just point to foo.openssf.org to a repo, let the repo handle that, do some very minor configuration to make the web pages pretty, and then we're done. I think it's a helpful process, but I have already raised to the TAC I think, legitimate question of, is this really the way we want to continue or not? So the TAC has not made a decision on that, but I think it's useful to at least be aware of this. And you know what? If this doesn't work for somebody, that's great. That's not a problem. Do something else. There's no requirement that everybody have to do everything exactly the same way, particularly if it doesn't work for them. Okay, I want to emphasize that point. If it doesn't work, please, let's do something else. But if simply creating a markdown page and editing it and creating a little simple page will do the job, I like simple. So there's a link to the TAC document, and I'm going to click on an example of what these look like. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's the ugly version. We don't want the ugly version. Who wants that? So let me copy the link address to a pretty version. So to be honest, this is actually a good time for this discussion. If you don't like this process, yeah, keep it simple, stupid. Well, yes, I'm aware of this acronym, but then I don't want everybody to talk about whether or not they want to kiss. So, I think now is a perfectly reasonable time. I mean, and all this is it's literally taking the GitHub defaults, doing some tweaks where they're where we want them. For example, there's been a recommendation for a different font, so this one just switches to a different font.
Okay.
And if it had heading numbers, it would have heading numbers. But these are all controllable per repo. We don't have to do things this way. The TAC has not ruled on anything. But if you like it or hate it, now would be a good time to talk about this. As I said, the expectation isn't that everybody has to do this, but if all you need to do is serve some simple static pages like an FAQ,
yeah,
being able to edit the repo, merge it into the main line once people are happy with it, and poof, it's done, has its appeals.
yes, it really does. Okay, cool.
Okay, so as I said, we don't have to do that way. One alternative has been, why don't we merge it into the top level OpenSSF.org domain? The challenge with that is that it's a WordPress site, so there's extra work in working out a workflow to make that happen. There's no question it can be done. 0% problem in doing it. The problem is now we got to work out the workflow, maintain the workflow. If we can avoid doing that, that's awesome. If we need to do that, then let's make sure we understand that we need to do that, and then let's figure out what needs doing.
Perfect.
Okay.
Oh, sorry if I.
So my guess, let's see here. What is the repo name that we're on right now, by the way? Is it S2C2F, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my guess would be if we did that, and by the way, Brian basically said, and I agree, let's not create domains that aren't being used. Okay. At the very least, let's not do that. So my guess is that there'd be an s2c2f.openssf.org if we did this approach. Now, I will note the best practices working group, they put all their documents in a docs subdomain, docs folder. We might choose to do the same. It keeps things a little cleaner from, say the stuff that you don't intend to publish on a site. But that's up to you. There's a million other ways. This is the general problem is, a whole lot of us know how to write software. There are so many ways to do this. It's embarrassing. And it makes it actually harder to make a decision because there's so many ways to do this.
Perfect. My next question was very, very relevant, and it's my last topic, and then we can move hand this over to Melba. I would love to maybe write some addendums or supplemental materials, such as like, how does the S2C2F apply to C and C++ scenarios? And, I just want to make sure that if we create these supplemental materials, that they are easy to find here, and that maybe we refer to them in the guide. But I think that there's been some, C and C++ has some unique scenarios associated with it that I think might deserve like a special walkthrough or example of what requirements apply and that sort of thing. And so same deal. I'm thinking of creating potentially a new folder with like supplemental materials or something like that.
I would be very interested in consuming that information for C and C++, as it's just a bit of a gray area for us at the moment. Yeah, we're doing the discovery on that at the moment.
That's great feedback. Yeah, we'd love to talk about it specifically, and like the things that I could talk about are how we did it inside Microsoft, but we'd love that's the beauty of working in this group, is that others probably have other best practices or what have you that they could contribute to it. Okay.
I've done a lot of C, more than a little C++. I guess I hadn't. It's been a little while since I've read the S2C2F spec, but I don't remember much being a problem for that specifically. Is there an example of something where you think it would be a big problem?
I can show an example of like where we're stuck, and as you may already know, but I think S2C2F kind of shows you can like read between some lines and figure out a golden path for how you ingest, how you introduce this code to your enterprise, how you describe it, what you do in terms of sort of governance compliance, in terms of looking for vulnerabilities, associating licenses, and the license clearing processes, all the way through to the inventory of what you've actually consumed and deployed or released. It just seems like a very almost cookie cutter approach for anything that lives in an external package manager, pretty much, and very reproducible. What you do for stuff you're bringing from PyPI, you can pretty much translate to what you do for NPM and Maven and so forth. For C and C++, most of it is obviously vended in from, as source and not from a package manager. And even just tools like Pearls and things like that, which are ways of achieving a lot of this framework, aren't an option or necessarily evident as an immediate option.
Now, the Pearls actually should be able to work with that. The problem is you're going to have to use some of the lesser known mechanisms in Pearls. Because the Pearls that most people point to are like Maven Pearls or PyPI Pearls. But Pearls also let you specify a straight up, here's the URL for downloads. And you can use that even if you would need special permission to download something. Because all it is really is it's a string to use to identify something. So as long as it's a unique identifier of that particular package or program,
But this then are other sources describing it in that same way. An example being, we're blessed now with so many vulnerability databases, but some pretty good open source or open platforms where things like OSB, where you can provide a Perl and find open vulnerabilities and things like that. I don't know if that necessarily is supported when looking to an external source for information about a dependency. It seems like something that's a little bit more nuanced and needs kind of more things related to hashing and stuff like that to figure out what it is and attribute it to.
Yeah.
Perl describes it as.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously one approach is you share the cryptographic hashes and use that as the identifiers. I think those can be helpful, at least sometimes, but you lose a lot of information with that. I mean, literally all you get is this mysterious sequence of digits. You have no idea of the version or name or anything else.
Yeah, so inside Microsoft, so an example of what I can share is that, you know, we use VCPKG as our method for consuming C and C++ OSS. And that tool, the way that tool works is they just maintain this giant list of recipes on how to build all the different OSS components. And every time you use that tool, it would go out to the public internet and grab the code that it needs and pull that into your build. Part of securing your supply chain is reducing your reliance on the public internet, also making sure that you cache your open source locally to prevent you from left pad incidents. And so with VCPKG, we didn't have like a repository manager, but we instead were marrying a copy of the OSS source code, and then we could point VCPKG at our internal clone instead of direct to the public internet. And this in effect accomplishes the same thing as making sure we have a local copy so we can always continue to build if for some reason the upstream has an outage or an availability issue.
Yeah, I will note that for left pad, it was more just, it wasn't just, hey, the repo went down temporarily. They actually literally deleted the package. And I will point out that one of their solutions, which I think is quite reasonable, is after a short period of time, I think it's 3 days, they just simply will not remove the package. Presumably they would if it was legally required, but other than that, they will not remove it. And I encourage all the repos to do that, because that, while obviously large organizations can manage their own copies and caches, I think it's also good to make sure the upstream is more reliable.
Very true. Very true. There's benefits to both. Okay, great. So like telling that kind of a story about, you know, how this is more applicable to the C and C++ world rather than this, and kind of adding that clarity for people that fall in that scenario. That's something that I want to try to accomplish in the months ahead. And that was kind of the last agenda item I had, and we can absolutely hand this over to Melba. Would you like to share your screen?
Sure. Give me one
Okay.
second.
Stop share.
Here. So I know we went over some of this, but I wanted to revisit it given the conversation earlier. So when I first looked at this, I saw this as an overlap with Salsa.
I'm sorry, which
And
one
then-
are you looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry. This one right here, integrity of an OSS package is tampered after build but before consumption, right?
Okay.
Because if you look at the attack, unfortunately, I'm only sharing the like the PDF. I'm not sharing like the rest of my screen. I have way too many things open.
Okay,
So,
that's fine. That's fine.
if you look at the attack diagram that Salsa has on their website, right? There's a part that talks about preventing tampering right after the build, right? And so there, with that diagram, it looks like there's a little bit of an overlap. After talking with Jay, right, he was explaining, like origin versus consumption, right, and where Salsa would play versus S2C2F, and we realized that there is a small gap between Salsa and S2C2F where there could be a handshake between the two in order to ensure that not only what you built is okay, but then right before you consume it, that it's okay. Before it gets published, so before it gets published, it also would have to ensure that there's build integrity and no tampering. And then once it's published, S2C2F would validate integrity. And there should be some sort of handshake. So that I wanted to bring that up because that part I thought was a small overlap. But there's also an opportunity to expand how the two interact.
Yes. So odd 3 is validate the integrity of the OSS that you consume. So yes, that is the touch point.
Tampered after build but before consumption. Yeah. And again, I don't have my whole screen, but let me find the link for that attack. It's also, I think it's like a threats or something like that. It's what it's called, threats and mitigations, maybe. Yeah, here it goes. This is version 1. Let me look for version 1.0. Oh, for some reason it's version 1.0. Supply chain threats, found it. Oh, okay. I'm going to put in the chat right here for folks to see. But if you see, right, there's the right after build, there's the F, G, and H part. So that's where my understanding of S2C2F and what I've read, right? I'm obviously not an expert. You all are. It seems like the frameworks start to talk to each other / overlap right about there. And so we would have to make it clear as to how we do cooperate with each other, given that we're under the same working group. The I know we went over these 3 stars last time. I think that's kind of where we stopped, and I kind of quickly zipped by. There are some examples where we'll have to clean up because it mentions Microsoft technology, right? Given that now it's in OpenSSF, we need to make sure that maybe it says, cloud itself is unavailable, right? Or just make
Yeah.
it agnostic. I forgot what this meant right here. What's it? Oh, I think this was around the point of we consider anything that's end of life, unmanaged or outdated, a vulnerability, right? Because there are risks associated to that. And so when you scan it, we want to also check for this, but it's not mentioned here. I think it's mentioned elsewhere. So I don't know what the group thinks about putting this in the scan it, right? You would want to understand that way ahead of time. You don't want to find that out later. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, scan it. SCA3 is our requirement to scan it to see if it's end of life. So we just didn't put it in the practices section. We can
Okay.
make that, bring that up.
Okay, let me okay, so you said it's in, you just didn't have it in here.
Yeah, SCA3 is the requirement.
SCA3 requirement does have this, just not section. Okay, so yeah, so that's minor, right? That should be a quick fix. And I think we mentioned this one a little bit about contradicting the earlier statement about, if you don't have resources and blah, 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 then you can do S2C2F and you don't want to necessarily do repo. And I can't remember what you said last time about this, where is it? This right here. If the scaling part, because I guess I interpret it differently than what was actually meant. But here it made it seem like, if you use S2C2F, you don't have to worry about doing, your own processes to mirror it or, put your own artifactory together, et cetera, et cetera. But then later on, you do talk about, I'm going back, you do talk about doing just that, right? To make sure that you have some package repository solution. So I think we did talk about this a little bit last time. I don't know if you recall.
Yeah. So the guidance that we're trying to describe is that development teams should have a package repository solution, a package caching solution. I guess I was, when I chose that, I was trying to look up, like, what is the industry term for what artifactory is, right? And so I thought package repository solution described things like JFrog Artifactory and other equivalent things like GitHub packages, Azure artifacts, those sorts of
Yeah, I
things.
wouldn't use that term. If you want to copy, I think the word cache is the right, or
Cache.
backup, or some other term like that.
Yeah. Okay. And that the guidance is we want teams to have a local copy of the packages they depend on, so that they aren't they can continue to build even if the upstream goes down.
Yep.
And the thing about scale was, in my conversations with lots of different companies, they try to implement some sort of central feed that all developers in their company pull from.
Mhm.
And that requires a lot of central overhead and other centralized expenses to manage it that way.
Yes.
So when I talk about scale, I think there are ways that we can build in these security protections into like every local developer's, package cache. Like each team has their own package cache feed for what their team uses.
Yeah, and I think we have to be also careful about who.
Oh, you're frozen, David.
He's frozen for me as well.
Cliffhanger. This was going to be great.
I would worry more about making sure that at least they have some, that decrease the likelihood that their upstream are available. But for a larger company, absolutely, caching the results so that they don't go away makes sense. I've actually seen two different approaches. Some of the organizations I've worked with, I should say, the whole point is to centralize it because it's not that they want to just cache. They want to have a separate permission group to decide whether or not which open source projects they want to use and which versions. Now, if an organization wants to do that, I think an organization has a right to choose that. I would not want to make that a part of this S2C2F because I think a lot of organizations have found it's really, really hard and expensive to do that kind of centralization. And the bigger the organization, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
That's why we weren't recommending it, but
but I think my point though is we have to somehow use our words to not suggest either of those two extremes. I mean, if you want to have a centralized, managed, and approval process, you can. That's not the point. You can download from a package from its official source, but that's not the point either. The point is you're trying to prevent loss when it's not available or it was deleted from the repo or whatever.
Yeah, so I definitely understand the concerns about, overhead, etc. But when we start defining trust, right? An organization, and if you look at the SSDF too, right, it talks about approved software packages. Do you have a repository where those approved software packages reside? Okay, so how do you know if it's approved or not? Who is going to approve that? What's the process, right? And so if there is an expectation that we have to vet these packages ahead of time, because then we can say, okay, then teams can cache it themselves if they want, or we can centralize it, or we can do some sort of, okay, if you can use this one and go to the internet and download it in your own cache, whatever it may be, right? There's still a process to vet that open source package. And even from a licensing perspective, I know not everybody has this problem, right? But from a licensing perspective, we also have to vet the open source package. So no matter what, at least for a large enterprise, you have to vet those packages. So if you're vetting those packages, you already have something in place. And so why not use that and extend it to do something like this, where you say, okay, yes, this is trusted. If you want to use a mirror, use a mirror. If you want to host it internally, you host it internally. But I worry that staying the scale part at the beginning and then expecting later on that you have to use trusted sources, it's really conflicting message, right? You can't have trusted sources at a large scale, right, without having some level of processes in place, so there's overhead to vet those packages ahead of time. Not sure if I made sense there.
So trusted sources, we can maybe use better words, but you know, it was things like thou shall use or consume packages from NuGet.org and not myget.com. And maybe your company that develops in Java cares about what Maven registry they pull their Maven packages from, and they want one instead of the other. Those are decisions that should be made to say, like, hey, your development team or your organization should make these kind of like upfront decisions, and then they need to be enforced.
I mean, I get the enforcement part, but I still think this is contradicting you don't need this centralization or the like, you know, an artifactory or blah, blah, blah. I don't remember the language. I still think that these two parts right here
Are conflicting.
contradicting the original message at the beginning of the paper. Because you can't do some of this stuff without overhead, right?
So,
Enforcement.
okay. So let me maybe I need
Go
to
back to the beginning of the paper. I mean, I guess let's
Sure,
read
sure.
that again.
Sure.
I mean, let's read that. Let's read that one more time, or read where you.
Hold
was it
on.
the scale. I think it was down below.
Event.
Right here.
Yeah. Yeah, it says some organizations may attempt to secure their OSS ingestion process through a central internal registry that all developers are supposed to pull from, right? But it has the problem of requiring a team to manage the process and workflow, right? So whether it's centralized or decentralized, the later part of the paper, you're literally saying, do this. So how else are you going to do that?
Okay, no,
Without overhead?
I'm not saying do that, and
Okay.
so I need to add clarity here.
Yeah. So Melba, the way this reads, they just reading it. I can see how you got there. When
Yeah.
I read this, I don't read, and that's maybe because it's the way that I'm reading it. I don't read where it says do this. I read where it says some organizations attempt to do this. However, what happens if this person does this? Is there anything preventing them from doing it? And then it says a centralized registry has a problem of X, Y, and Z. And then it talks about there are some tools that help organizations do this. And then down at the bottom, I don't think it suggests to do this down at the bottom. I think it says I think down at the bottom, it even says, you know, this could be a way. And if you do this way, so down here it says, you know, have the ability within your organization to audit consumption. And that's regardless of whether you do it that way or not.
Yeah.
Just have the ability to audit it. And then it says through some type of a standardized consumption tool. It just says such as. So you could do whatever you want to do there. It just says have a way to audit it. And then down here under the enforcement, when it talks about artifacts must be consumed from a trusted source. I agree, define what trusted is, but trusted source could be from any place that you deem is trustworthy. That's due to whatever processes or procedures you use to determine that trusted source. But that still doesn't mean that you have to create a centralized registry, although that might be a preferred method. But I guess what the thought process is, some organizations may not have financially have that capability. Regardless, you must be able to audit how you consume. And I think that's the crux of that part right there. Up above, I'm reading it saying organizations can do this, but there's a problem with doing it. And then you, in order to solve that problem, you must be able to have access to a certain tools such as, right? So that's how I'm reading all of that. I can see how you got to where you got to, but when I read it the way I'm reading it, I'm saying such as, I only see one must, the ability to audit. I don't see that happen anywhere else. And consume from a trusted, right? And I agree with you here, define what trusted is. If it's not defined anywhere, definitely define what that means. But I think that there's a one must, and that's consumption audit, and everything else is like, you can do this, but you need this.
Yeah, Jay, that's also my reading, but I totally see how Melba's getting. I also see how Melba's getting that. I think this needs to be modified to make that much clearer. Because I've worked with some orgs which actually do the you must use this, go through, and what I've not actually worked in that situation, but my understanding from those folks who are in that situation is, wow, is this hard? You know, the central org is always hideously behind because it's always hard to fund a central org. They always get, often get short shrift. And then the individual project always is, they're beholden to a very small group of people who have limited time.
Yeah, I was going to say the hard part about that, I don't even know if the money's the hard part. I think it's the SLOs are the hard part, especially if you can't guarantee like a 12-hour turnaround, and now you're into 24 or 48, and guess what? You've only got 40 hours to turn over whatever you need to turn over so that you can beat the clock into GA. So I'd say the time limits are your biggest hurdles.
I think that is how it results as a problem, but the cause of those time limits is lack of resources in the central org, where it's always underestimated how long it's going to take to do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Melba, I just want to, if you could scroll up just a little bit, because the red text, I know we're out of time. The red text you wrote there contradict what is discussed earlier about not needing an internal repo or mirror of OSS. No, we always want development teams to have like a cache of the packages that they consume, and potentially also clone the open source code for proper business continuity and disaster recovery. Up here, it's really just talking about having a central team that manages that.
Yeah. It sounds to me like up front there needs to be a definition of this means this, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that, and maybe pick a term like cache or back, or I don't know. I mean, cache seems like the obvious way, although the problem is that word has multiple meanings. But
everything has multiple meanings.
Guys, I got to drop, guys. I got to drop.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to drop too.
Okay.
Melba, we love the feedback though. Keep it coming.
You all have this, so I can always do an asynchronous session if you need me to, but I do have to drop.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.